going to be AR in enterprise. We've heard from a lot of our panelists already, but I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves really quickly, what they're working on, and then we'll dive right in.
Hi, my name is Richard Velasquez. I lead emerging technologies teams. I've had a lot of enterprise experience in companies like PepsiCo, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble, Honda, Porsche. So that's the perspective I bring.
Hi, my name is Vineet. I'm with TCS, and I head digital as a horizontal service line for corporate accounts in TCS.
Good afternoon. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Campbell. I look after the ThingWorks AR and IoT platform at PTC.
Hey everybody, Jay Kim. I'm with Upskill. We used to be formerly known as APX Labs, and I'm in charge of product and industry alliances and partnerships.
Awesome. And I don't know if each of these videos are separate, so I'll say again, I'm Callie Leone, the founder of Braver Labs. So we're talking about enterprise. We've heard a lot of really interesting things throughout this entire conference today. Let's start with consolidating the main challenges for enterprise players in the AR space right now, and specifically within your organizations. What are the things that jump out at you that you're like, oh my God, we have to deal with that?
Sorry.
Go for it.
So as I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges with driving this technology in the organization with leadership is them not having experience with the technology. So when you're trying to come up with the scenarios of how to use it across all the different spaces, whether it's productivity or driving revenue or increasing employee engagement, or any of those aspects, it's kind of sometimes eyes glazed over. Okay, I kind of understand what you're talking about, but when you talk with someone who's actually experienced it and put on a headset or done AR or VR, it's a much easier conversation. So it's really about getting it out there, making sure that they've had those experiences. And as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons I set up that AR VR lab at PepsiCo, is just to get in a HoloLens, get it in a Vive, and drive people through some of the real great experiences so that they can understand and make those connections later on when you're trying to propose an avenue for implementing that in the organization.
Yeah, I guess maybe I would echo the point around awareness, as we talked about on a previous panel. When people experience AR for the first time, it's such a delightful thing. You can see it in their faces. Their eyes really do become open to the potential. So I think that awareness is the first challenge. The second major challenge that we see as a solution provider trying to help people in the enterprise embrace this stuff is the challenge around content creation. How quickly can I build this? Industrial companies are struggling with the time and the effort that it takes to get something that can be that eye-opening, amazing experience. So they're really challenged by that as well, I think.
Echoing what Mike is saying, and actually the first two comments, awareness and the content. The content is the 9 million pound gorilla kind of in the AR space, and by the way, gaining weight. So trying to jump from where we are with PCs and tablets and smartphones, and then jumping kind of all over into augmented reality everywhere. You've got floating bubbles and all kinds of cool sexy 3D things. There have to be kind of incremental steps taken along the way, and I can only speak obviously within the enterprise context, and a lot of that comes from the fact that in order for people to get started on the idea, it's really about finding the right kind of the use case, finding the right application, having a set of metrics that you're looking to improve upon. It could be productivity, it could be efficiency, quality, what have you. And then non-quantitative metrics like safety also become second order effects to all of this. And getting started with the right kind of the use case and matching the current capabilities of the technology, if you will, against the business problems that you're trying to go and solve. I say this all the time. Technology is a means to an end in solving the problem. And augmented reality is a great tool, but if you don't apply it properly, then you get into the scenario where you've been handed the AR hammer and everything else around you looks like a nail.
I think all three friends said it in the right way. I'll just add that most of the enterprise users look at this AR technology and say it's cool, it's probably worth it for the consumer use cases, but do you really think it'll work out where we have all these legacy applications all complex systems, the regulations, will it really work? Is there a value, is there a business benefit that you can really derive out of this technology? So I think that's a big question in pretty much every business user's mind in enterprise world.
And if I can add just one more thing, because you mentioned content, and that's really key. Because I was at in Augmented World Expo last week in San Francisco, and they were showing off this fancy new headset with 60 degrees of freedom. I was really excited to try it out, but the experience that they had on it was very poor. So it just left me walking away not with a sense of awe, but with a sense of disappointment. And if that's the first experience someone has and they've never had experience before, you can kind of forget about them looking at applications in the future and you're just like, nah, I don't really think that's going to work out. So you got to make sure that that first experience is actually an awe-inspiring one.
And I think that's, if we just peel the onion back one more layer, there's content. How do I build it, and how do I deliver it? But there's also the challenge around the user experience. We as society, we figured out desktop apps and how to design those. We figured out mobile apps. We figured out web apps. This is a whole new medium of communication. And there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to explore. And we're doing that. We're progressing down that journey. But in order to learn, we've got to be able to try and iterate. We've got to be able to do that quickly. And that's something that we think is very important. That's one of the challenges we're trying to address, is to reduce those cycle times so that you can get to the point where the experience is truly amazing.
So that's kind of a giant minefield, basically, is what I'm hearing. But why now? You have this huge, crazy minefield in front of you. What is making you want to get to the other side?
I think if you look at the technology hype curve, that's a lot of what we look at when we're driving emerging technologies. Is what's the state of the technology right now? It's already gone over the hump. Virtual reality, I think, is a little bit ahead of augmented reality in that hype curve, but it's, people are doing it. There's a lot of activity around building the hardware, building the experiences. So at this stage, it's really, you don't want to be the competitor that's left behind and last one out the gate. So I think that's.
See, one thing I would definitely like to add, why now, is I think the need has always been there. Why now is because the convergence of technology has become real today. The way the entire edge, IoT, artificial intelligence, the whole data lake concept, all of this has converged so rapidly in the last 1 or 2 years that today for you to be able to be relevant on an augmented reality concept is pretty much doable today. Maybe a couple of years back, it was not possible. You might have a cool gadget, but for you to be able to link in through the tons of data behind in the enterprise systems, that would not have been possible. But with cloud computing, with big data technologies, today it's doable. It's upon us to make that use case happen with these technologies.
Yeah, so just playing off of that, I think that not only is the technology making it possible, but the explosion of data, the explosion of information, the cognitive load that we're all under because of all of this data that's being analyzed and streaming and presented around us must be contextualized in order for us to understand it, in order for us to be effective, in order for us to be productive, in order for us to be safe. It's on the verge of being a mandate so that we can simply survive and thrive in the explosion of information.
How many people here in the room have heard of Industry 4.0? So about a third of you. So Industry 4.0 is a term that describes kind of the fourth industrial revolution that we're in. Things like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, AI, or AR and VR and other kinds of IoT, of course, kind of all get binned into that category. And if you look at all of the different foundational technologies that are considered as Industry 4.0, AR is the only one that actually touches on the people. The people that actually work and leverage and kind of make things and build things and move things. And what AR is serving, and this is a very critical role, is that as the rest of the infrastructure, like if you look at an old factory, that factory is turning into a digital factory. On the design side, there's stuff that Mike and his team over at the PTC, folks are doing on the design side that's creating a lot of that content. He's also got a business, nice business at that, that's, creating an IoT platform to get all these machines and objects to start talking to each other. What about the people? So you've got your infrastructure that's getting crazy smart. There's a lot of data that's happening. At some point, that data has to get turned into something actionable. Analytics can go and do that, but at the end of the day, more often than not, if you look at your standard kind of industrial environment, it's the people that actually turn that actionable intelligence into actual actions. And that's why AR is a big deal.
I love that you brought up that AR is about the people. And especially that notion in an enterprise setting, there's got to be so much buy-in from across the organization to really implement this. There's probably not one part of an organization that AR can't touch, at least several years down the line when it's really, really adopted. Can you talk about the teams that you guys work with day to day on AR? Who needs to buy into this, and what does that dynamic look like within the organization?
I can talk from my perspective, and the speech that I gave earlier, I talked about the 4 areas where I see for those people who are trying to drive AR into the enterprise, and they were building brands, employee engagement, I'm blanking right now, building brands, employee engagement, productivity, and revenue generation. So, and all of those will come in different areas of the organization. So if I was looking at the health and wellness stuff that I was talking about earlier in terms of like the VR meditation and or that Tai Chi app, that would really go more towards like the HR organizational side and the health and wellness groups within that. When I look at productivity, it's really like supply chain and operations. When I look at revenue driving and brand building, it's more along the lines of sales and marketing. So, and a lot of times those teams will take their own initiatives unless, and it depends on how the organization is set up. So in this case of having an emerging technologies team, it's identifying those technologies and then identifying which groups within the organization are best or have the needs that this technology could address.
Yeah, I would just add that maybe to put a layer over that, I think that if we recognize that augmented reality is a new medium of communication and presentation of information, everybody in the organization that's trying to do that, from the way you market and sell, to the way that you service, to the way you manufacture, to the way that you ultimately support and take care of your customers in the market, everybody looks at this technology and says, okay, this is something that I can use. So what's key to make it a productive engagement with an enterprise is to Jay's point, let's focus on a use case. Let's focus on the value that we want to drive, specific metrics, and let's go have some early success there. Let's go win.
So one example I could give on the whole collaboration piece is the Industry 4.0 that he mentioned, Mike, that he talked about, the whole integrating people between the design to manufacturing to servicing. The design piece itself, there's so much of opportunity today that if there are people who are designing, let's say, some part of the aircraft engine, and there are at least 100 parties involved to make sure that the design is right. It takes almost like 9 months today to do even one iteration of a complete design cycle. So with this augmented reality, we created an application where people sitting in different parts of the world, where whether it's China or anywhere, and people could really co-design some of the elements between the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to make sure that the back and forth that happens to make sure that the design is right is reduced drastically. So the entire amount of design cycle time that goes down by almost 30 to 40% by just making sure that all the parties are together being able to answer some of the questions that is needed to complete the design. So that's the power of augmented reality in my view when it comes to collaboration in enterprise world.
So I'll give a real example of what we've done at the Boeing company. So initially the groups that we engaged with were folks that were tasked with looking at new and emerging technology as it applies to their manufacturing environment. So Boeing calls this BR&T, short for Boeing Research and Technology. They don't necessarily have like a corporate innovation group, so to say, but it's a very large organization that broadly looks at how Boeing can innovate with technology. So the initial kind of the pilot project started with Boeing coming in and thinking that AR can have a tremendous impact in their wire harness assembly process, which is labor intensive, it's highly variable, and there's a lot of room for error. So as that kind of evolved into something that was deployable and something that could be deployable at scale, naturally the manufacturing leadership within the Boeing business units get involved. And they start kind of being the operational sponsor that takes this and then builds it into the shop floor. IT ends up being a major stakeholder throughout this process, because if you're ultimately, Boeing looks at a pair of AR device or AR smart glasses or any kind of a device as something that has to be centrally managed through IT. So they become a huge stakeholder in the enterprise-wide rollout of these kinds of capabilities. And then lastly, you go all the way up to their executive leadership that looks at it and kind of has this moment that says this is really, really strategic, and how they're going to, Boeing believes, and a number of our customers do as well, that AR is going to fundamentally change how their people work. So that then becomes, a number of different conversations, including how Boeing wants to come in and have a larger role in the AR community, which is what actually led to them investing in the Series B round that we just closed a couple months ago.
So one final very quick question for each of you. How are you looking to collaborate with other players in the industry, and what is going to be most beneficial to your organizations moving forward?
So for me, it's really just understanding what's coming down the pipe, what people are working on. That's one of the reasons I went to San Francisco for the Augmented World Expo, is just to understand, experience, and see what's being driven. And from there, you start making the connections in terms of understanding from the different departments what their pain points are, what their needs are, and then making those connections and understand this would be a perfect application for that, or this would be a perfect startup or group to speak to this other group in terms of making those connections.
Say, at TCS, I just wanted to show one slide where we've created this ecosystem called TCS Digital Store. We're bringing all this new technologies, and I saw some very cool stuff this morning. There's a lot of innovation happening in the market, but then for us to go take it to all of our customers, which are about, let's say, 2,000 customers across the globe, we've got this list of personas, list of use cases, list of KPIs. So an example that we did where Microsoft HoloLens bought in this whole cool technology, we created this application for one of the turbine servicing, where today it takes a lot of time and money to actually service a particular turbine. Now, using a HoloLens, we created an application for the field service engineer, where he could actually go to the site, or even being at remote, he can actually visualize that the actual turbine. He can, wherever he is, he doesn't have to be at the site. He could look at the turbine, do multiple functions, look at what part of the turbine is actually in trouble, and go dig down into the systems and say that if that particular equipment has to be prevented from going down, I need to do 5 things. And that 5 things quickly overlays a step-by-step instruction on top of his physical asset, right? And then he would be able to fix that and prevent any of these downtimes happening. So this is a live application that we did. We have done one with Meta. We've done another one with HTC Vive, more on the virtual side. But then the point is, to your question, that how do we bring the continuous innovation that's happening in the market to actually continuous deployment to our customers, is we are marrying this whole knowledge of our customers' landscape and applying these technologies quickly. Because every technology is moving so quickly that the mobile app was so cool a year back, today it becomes a commodity, right? I'm sure within AR also this is going to be a trend as we go in the few months. So we feel that applying it to the real use cases very quickly is key in the enterprise world.
Yeah, I would just emphasize the collaboration point, right? I mean, we need business stakeholders, we need system integrators, we need all kinds of technology providers from the hardware side, from the enterprise system side, from the AR authoring side, digital eyewear. I mean, all of that's got to come together in order to make this stuff really work. And I think there's a lot of collaboration happening out in the AR community. It's awesome. We all have some great opportunities here, and it's going to be required to do what we're trying to do.
AR under enterprise probably has the most vibrant ecosystem out there amongst all the different AR subsegments that you look at it. It's actually the roles and responsibilities of the different players are pretty well defined. One other group of companies that we do a lot of work with are what we call the traditional kind of system of record providers. So your enterprise ISVs, your SAP, your Oracle, your IBM. Because we believe that in order for AR to start really making some of the measurable impact, it starts with actually a lot of the content, going back to that theme, a lot of the content the largest enterprises already have. And that's not necessarily 3D data, that's boring data. PTC actually has a fair amount of data in the form of IoT information that's provided through the ThingWorx platform. So we look at how can we go and work better and more effectively with providers that hold all these systems of records. If you look at the digital infrastructure within the largest enterprises of the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.